Hello, my name is Emily O'Toole, and I decided to do Stone Fox for my read aloud. So here we go. So when I started doing or reading the chapter from this story, the first thing I really looked at was the cover of the story in the first page and the title. And so when I really took a look at this picture of this boy and his dog, I realized that I was doing some inferencing. And what I was inferencing about this is that I was looking at the dog and I was looking at the boy. And when you take a closer look, you can see that the dog has something in his mouth. And so I can infer that this boy and this dog, by their body language and through how they're standing there, that they know each other. They may have some sort of connection, and that the dog wants to play. And so then I moved on to the first page here, and it was titled Grandfather. And when I read this page, a few reading behaviors that I did was making connections. And one of those ones was about the very first line there that I have highlighted. It says, "One day grandfather wouldn't get out of bed. He'd just lay there and stare at the ceiling and look sad." And so with this connection I made was that his grandfather on this page talked about being sick and getting sick. And how I made this connection was to my own life, and mine might not have been my grandfather, but it was my grandmother, and she got sick not too terribly long ago. She had cancer, and so when the boy was talking about his father not being able to get out of bed, or his grandfather not being able to get out of bed, and staring at the ceiling, I could definitely relate how this boy was feeling, because my grandmother was the exact same way, you know. And then also through potato farm. Well, my mom's side of the family owns a potato farm up north in North Dakota here, and are big potato farmers. So when it talked about how fun it was and all the hard work that they do, I could make a lot of connections to that. And then the other reading behavior that I came across while reading this page was questioning. What's wrong with the grandfather? Why is he not getting out of bed? Why is he just staring there at the ceiling? Is he really sick? Is there something else going on? All these questions were swirling through my head. So then on to the next page. One reading behavior that I came across was making connections. And this one was about the grandfather and how he always liked to play tricks on him, and how he would joke around, and how he thought he was the funniest guy. And the connection I made there with that is that my grandfather is exactly like that. He thinks he is the funniest man in the room, and tells the worst jokes possible, but really is a great guy. But he just thinks he's the funniest guy. And so when this kid was talking about how his grandfather would throw his head back and laugh and play all these tricks on him, I was like, oh, I can relate to that. That's exactly like my own grandfather. Another reading behavior I came across was visualizing. And so, like I said, with my grandfather laughing and being a jokester too, I could visualize this grandfather really easily. I have highlighted there on the page, then he would throw his head back and laugh, and I could just picture this grandfather. It may be in my head my grandfather, or, you know, someone else's grandfather, but I could picture it in my head, standing there, throwing his head back and laughing, and just hearing that boisterous laugh. And so then with the other reading strategy I have is making predictions. And I have highlighted grandfather was playing, it was another trick. Well, I could make a prediction. Well, is back on the previous page, it talked about how he was laying in bed sick. Well, is he really sick, or is he, I kind of predicted, well, maybe he's playing another joke on the boy, on Willie. So that was one of the predictions I made while I was reading. On the next page, on page 5, some key terms or some reading behaviors I came across while I was reading this page was one of them was making connections. And this one was, you could tell on this page that Willie was really worried about his grandfather. And you can tell that by when he raced to the doctor and making that connection. As I said before, my grandmother was very sick and passed away not too long ago. But I can make that connection to how worried he was about his grandfather through my own experiences. And then visualizing, I visualized while I was reading what Searchlight looked like. The description of this dog was really great. It was a big black dog. She had a white spot on her forehead the size of a silver dollar. I can see that perfectly in my head. Along with Doc Smith was sitting in a rocking chair under the trees reading a book. I can picture that in my head perfectly. A doctor sitting in a log cabin on a porch reading a book, rocking in a rocking chair in my brain. I can picture it so easily. And then with making predictions, I was thinking about, well, what is the doctor going to do while I was reading this? And I predicted that, well, with this boy running to see a doctor, the doctor would come back to the house and check on the grandfather. So those were the predictions I was making. And then on the next page, page 6, we had a picture. So that even helped even more with my reading skill, reading behavior I was doing with visualizing. Because on this page, Willie had run up to the doctor, and I could visualize in my head the doctor sitting there turning the pages, continuing to read, and not having a really worry about it because she knew how Willie's grandfather was. But then I also used fluent phrasing reading, and how I did this is when I was reading, as you're reading the page, how late did you two stay up last night? We went to bed early, really, really early. No singing or music or anything. Doc Smith stopped reading. You kind of have a, pause. And because that's such a shock. And so that's what I did while I was phrasing my reading. I kind of just paused there because you can tell that in this part, I could tell that Doc Smith was surprised. And so that's how I did it with my reading. On page 7, we had some reading behaviors that I did was solving words. Okay, so the first thing with this one was the word hitch. And I was really kind of confused because nowadays you don't say, oh, hitch me up Rex for me. I was kind of confused and had to go back and reread that. Hitch, what does that mean? And then I read on and I realized that she was talking about her horse, which that comes to my other word that I kind of struggled with was palomino. And this one I did some synthesizing with and had to go look up what a palomino looked like because I myself am not familiar with horses at all. And so I did some little digging deeper into what that was. So then another reading behavior I did was fluent reading phrasing. So on this page, I could tell that there was a lot of urgency going on. As the last page stopped with a pause, this one I felt like I was reading really quick because they were in a hurry and they were quickly going and it was just it needed to be read quickly and fast because it was urgent. And then I could visualize all this going on, Searchlight put her big paws up on front of the bed and rested her head on grandfather's chest. She licked his beard, which was full of tears. I could visualize that in my head. This big dog with a quarter-sized white spot on her head, or leaning up on the bed to grandfather, licking his beard because she was worried about him. I could visualize that perfectly in my head. And then on page 8, one key term that reading behavior I did was inferencing, because as I have circled there, the doctor's face, She doesn't look too worried. So, on this page, she does look worried, because she rushed in, everything that's happened, got her doctor bag, went through everything. I inferred that, she's, through her body language and her actions, she's worried about this grandfather, about Willie's grandfather, and that something is really wrong. Then on page 9, I did some inferencing here too. So, after the doctor did everything and checked out grandfather, she seemed kind of snippy. And through her responses and her actions and her dialogue, I inferred that she wasn't too terribly worried. So I went from being super worried to about this grandfather who seemed super sick, lying in bed, not getting out, to going, oh, well, the doctor's not so worried. Then I inferred that maybe it was a trick. Because from her dialogue, she says, must you ask so many questions? And then her actions, she walked over to the window and looked out into the field of potatoes. If a doctor was really worried about somebody, they'd be doing everything they possibly can to figure out what was wrong with him. But the doctor wasn't doing that. So I was inferencing that maybe the grandfather was playing a trick. And then on page 10, a reading behavior I did was visualizing. And I was visualizing this grandfather and how it says in the text, it happens when a person gives up on life for whatever reason, starts up here in our minds first and then spreads to the body. Well, I was visualizing this doctor explaining this to Willie, and or Dr. Smith explaining it to Willie, and how she, took a deep breath and then she began. And then she says it's a real sickness, but she says your grandfather doesn't want to live anymore. And I could picture Willie's face just kind of shocked, because he says, but what about fishing and the rodeo and turkey dinners? Doesn't he want those things anymore? I could just picture a shocked face and visualize that in my brain. But then that also led me to questioning, why is the grandfather not wanting to live anymore? What is it about his life that makes him not want to live? And questioning, why did this happen all of a sudden? And then on page 11, making connections, Willie, I have it highlighted, it must be something else. And then he also says, I'll make grandfather want to live again. The determination that this boy has for his grandfather. I made the connection to my life of when my grandmother was really sick and how determined I was to make her feel comfortable and be supportive and do all these things even though I knew she wasn't going to last much longer, but to support her and to give her comfort, and that determination I had as well. I connected to Willie. So yeah, that is my read aloud thought process and everything I went through. Thanks for listening. And then here are my resources that I used for this. So yeah, thank you for watching.